When Emily died, I thought the worst of my suffering was over. I was wrong. The silence in our house was deafening. No more laughter, no more whispers of love before bed. Just the echo of memories in empty rooms. I started to hate the place that once held our happiest moments. The first sign of something wrong came a week after her funeral. It was late, past midnight. I was sitting in the living room staring blankly at the flickering TV, trying to drown out the silence. That's when I heard it, a faint, familiar humming, Emily's favorite tune. I shook my head, blaming my grief-stricken mind for the auditory hallucination, but the humming continued, growing louder and more distinct. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. I stood up, heart pounding, and followed the sound up the stairs towards our bedroom. The door creaked as I pushed it open and the humming stopped abruptly. I flicked on the light, expecting to see nothing but an empty room. Instead, there was an indentation on Emily's side of the bed, as if someone had just been lying there. My breath caught in my throat, and I stumbled backward, knocking over a photo frame on the nightstand. The glass shattered, and in the dim light I saw something that made my blood run cold. Written on the inside of the frame in what looked like Emily's handwriting were the words, "I miss you." I didn't sleep that night. How could I, with the image of that message burned into my mind? The next day I convinced myself it was a cruel trick of the light, a figment of my imagination. But deep down, I knew something was very wrong. And that was just the beginning. The following days were a blur. I tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy, going through the motions of work and daily life. But every evening when I returned home, the sense of dread grew stronger. The house felt different, colder, as if the very air was charged with an unseen presence. It was a Wednesday night when things escalated. I was in the kitchen, washing dishes, trying to keep my mind occupied. The room suddenly became icy, my breath visible in the air. The temperature drop was swift and unnatural. I spun around, searching for an explanation, but there was none. The lights flickered and a chill ran down my spine. Then I heard it, a soft whisper, so faint I could barely make out the words. It was Emily's voice. "Come to me." I dropped the plate I was holding, shattering it on the tiled floor. The whisper came again, more insistent this time. "Come to me." My legs moved on their own as if drawn by an invisible force. I followed the voice out of the kitchen and up the stairs. Each step felt heavier, as if I was wading through thick fog. The air grew colder the closer I got to our bedroom. When I reached the door, it swung open by itself, revealing a scene that should have been impossible. Emily stood in the center of the room, her form translucent and shimmering like a mirage. She looked just as she did in life, but there was an unsettling, otherworldly quality to her appearance. "Emily?" I whispered, my voice trembling. She didn't respond, just stared at me with those familiar eyes, now filled with an unspoken sorrow. I took a hesitant step forward, reaching out to her. But as soon as I crossed the threshold, the temperature plummeted further, and she vanished. The room was empty, but the bed was in disarray, the sheets tangled and the pillow indented, as if someone had been there moments before. I backed out of the room, heart racing, and fled down the stairs. The house felt oppressive, the walls closing in on me. That night, I couldn't bring myself to sleep in our bedroom. I camped out on the couch, clutching a blanket for warmth. As I drifted in and out of a fitful sleep, I heard the whisper again, echoing through the dark. "Come to me." It was clear now. Emily's spirit was trapped, and she was reaching out to me. But why? What did she want, and how could I help her? The questions gnawed at my sanity, and I knew I had to find answers before the haunting consumed me entirely. The next morning, I woke with a start, my body stiff from a restless night on the couch. The whispers and chills of the previous evening seemed like a distant nightmare, but the memory of Emily's ghostly form lingered. Determined to uncover the truth, I decided to investigate. I started with the bedroom, the epicenter of the strange occurrences. The room was just as I left it, but the bed's disarray was undeniable. I rummaged through Emily's belongings, looking for anything that might explain her haunting. As I sifted through her clothes and personal items, I found a small, ornate box tucked away in the back of her closet. Inside the box was a collection of trinkets, old photos, letters, and a delicate silver locket. I opened the locket, revealing a tiny photo of us on our wedding day. My heart ached with the memory, Beneath the locket, there was a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. I carefully unfolded it, revealing a handwritten note in Emily's neat script. "I am sorry. I never meant for this to happen. Please forgive me." I stared at the note, trying to decipher its meaning. What was Emily apologizing for? And how could it be related to the haunting? As I pondered these questions, I felt a cold draft sweep through the room. The temperature dropped rapidly, and the lights flickered again. I turned around and my eyes fell on the large mirror above the dresser. Something was wrong. Instead of my reflection, I saw Emily's face, her eyes wide with fear. Her mouth moved, forming silent words. I stepped closer, my heart pounding, and strained to hear her. "Help me." The words were faint but unmistakable. She reached out from within the mirror, her translucent hand pressing against the glass. I mirrored her movement, my hand hovering just inches from hers. The cold intensified and frost began to form on the mirror's surface. "Emily, what do you need?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She didn't answer, but her expression grew more desperate. The mirror fogged over, obscuring her face. I wiped at the glass, but it was no use. She was gone. I stumbled back, my mind racing. There had to be a reason for her haunting, a way to help her find peace. The note and the locket were clues, but I needed more information. I decided to visit her old friends and family, hoping they could shed light on her mysterious apology. As I left the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The cold lingered, a chilling reminder that Emily's spirit was never far away. And as I drove to our first destination, I vowed to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. My first stop was Emily's best friend, Sarah. We hadn't spoken much since the funeral, the weight of grief forming an unspoken barrier between us. As I knocked on her door, I wondered how much she knew about Emily's hidden sorrows. Sarah opened the door, her eyes widening in surprise. "John, it's been a while. Come in," she said, stepping aside to let me in. The warmth of her home was a stark contrast to the icy chill that had taken over mine. We sat in her cozy living room, the scent of freshly brewed coffee filling the air. After some small talk, I broached the subject that had brought me there. "Sarah, I found something strange in Emily's things. A note. It said, 'I am sorry. I never meant for this to happen. Please forgive me.' Do you know what she might have been referring to?" Sarah's face paled and she looked away, fiddling with her coffee cup. "I was afraid this might come up," she said softly. "Emily told me something once, a few months before she died. She made me promise not to tell you, but I think you need to know." My heart raced as I leaned forward, urging her to continue. "What did she say?" Sarah took a deep breath, her eyes filling with sorrow. "Emily was having strange dreams. Nightmares, really. She said she felt like something was watching her, following her. At first, she thought it was just stress, but then things started happening. Objects moving on their own, whispers in the night. She was terrified, John. She thought she was losing her mind." I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. Why didn't she tell me? She didn't want to worry you, and she hoped it would go away on its own, but it didn't. It got worse. She started seeing things, figures in the shadows, faces in the mirror. She thought she was being haunted. Sarah's words echoed in my mind, aligning disturbingly with my own experiences. Did she ever say why she thought this was happening? Sarah shook her head. No, she never figured it out, but she did mention one thing, an old house she visited as a child. She said she always felt uneasy there, like something dark was hiding in the walls. I think it might be connected. My mind reeled. An old house? A childhood fear? It seemed like a stretch, but I had nothing else to go on. Do you know where this house is? Yes, she mentioned it once. It's in a small town a few hours from here. I can give you the address. I took the address from Sarah, my hands shaking. Thank you, Sarah. I need to find out what's going on, for Emily's sake. As I left Sarah's house, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The pieces were slowly coming together, and I had a lead. The haunted house from Emily's childhood might hold the key to freeing her spirit. The drive to the small town was filled with a sense of impending dread. The sky grew darker as I approached, clouds heavy with the promise of rain. As I pulled up to the old house, a shiver ran down my spine. It stood there, decrepit and foreboding, like a dark sentinel guarding its secrets. I took a deep breath and stepped out of the car, determined to uncover the truth. Whatever had haunted Emily in life was still with her in death, and I was going to find out why. The old house loomed before me, its weathered facade a grim testament to years of neglect. Vines crept up the walls, and the windows were dark and empty, like hollow eyes. I hesitated at the front gate, a sense of foreboding washing over me. But I had come too far to turn back now. The gate creaked open with a groan, and I made my way up the cracked pathway to the front door. It was slightly ajar, as if inviting me in. I pushed it open, the hinges protesting with a loud screech. Inside, the air was stale and thick with dust. The dim light filtering through the dirty windows cast eerie shadows on the peeling wallpaper. I stepped into the foyer, my footsteps echoing in the silence. The house felt alive, as if it were watching me, waiting for me to uncover its secrets. I took a deep breath and began to explore. The living room was filled with old, decaying furniture. A grand piano stood in one corner, its keys yellowed and cracked. I ran my fingers over them, a dissonant chord ringing out. The sound seemed to linger in the air, amplifying the oppressive atmosphere. I moved on, finding a staircase that led to the second floor. Each step creaked under my weight, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was not alone. At the top of the stairs, a long hallway stretched out before me, lined with closed doors. I chose the first door on my left and pushed it open. The room was a child's bedroom, frozen in time. Dusty toys lay scattered on the floor, and the bed was still made, as if waiting for its occupant to return. A sense of sadness washed over me as I imagined Emily as a child, playing in this very room. I walked over to the window, looking out at the overgrown garden below. That's when I saw it. A figure standing in the garden, half hidden by the shadows. My heart skipped a beat as I recognized Emily. She was staring up at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and fear. I rushed out of the room and down the stairs, determined to reach her. But when I burst through the front door and into the garden, she was gone. The only evidence of her presence was a small, faded photograph lying on the ground. I picked it up, my hands trembling. It was a picture of Emily as a child, standing in front of the house with her parents. They looked happy, unaware of the darkness that would one day envelop their lives. I pocketed the photograph and continued my search. The next room I entered was the master bedroom. It was a stark contrast to the child's room, cold, dark, and foreboding. The bed was unmade, and the air smelled of mildew. As I scanned the room, my eyes fell on an old leather-bound journal on the nightstand. I picked it up and began to read, the pages filled with the shaky handwriting of Emily's mother. The entries started off normal, detailing daily life and family events. But as I read on, they grew increasingly erratic and disturbing. Something is wrong with this house. I feel it watching us, whispering to us in the night. Emily says she sees shadows moving in the corners of her room. I don't know what to do. The entries continued, each one more frantic than the last. It's getting worse. Emily is having nightmares and she wakes up screaming. I've tried everything, but the darkness won't leave us alone. I'm so scared. The final entry sent a chill down my spine. I can't take it anymore. We have to leave, but I'm afraid it's too late. It's inside us now, and I don't know how to get rid of it. God help us. I closed the journal, my hands shaking. The haunting had started long before Emily's death. Whatever dark presence had plagued her childhood had followed her into adulthood. And now, it was haunting me too. I left the house, the photograph and journal clutched tightly in my hands. I had more questions than answers, but I knew one thing for certain. Emily's spirit was trapped, and the key to freeing her lay in the dark history of that house. As I drove away, I vowed to uncover the truth, no matter how horrifying it might be. Back home, the oppressive atmosphere of the house felt even more unbearable after my visit to Emily's childhood home. I placed the photograph and journal on the kitchen table, their presence a silent reminder of the darkness that had plagued Emily's life. I knew I needed help to unravel the mystery. The next day, I visited the local library, hoping to find historical records or information about the house and its previous occupants. The librarian, an elderly woman with kind eyes, led me to the archives room. "If you're looking for information on old properties, this is the place," she said with a knowing smile. I spent hours combing through dusty files and yellowed newspapers, piecing together the history of the house. It had been built in the early 1900s by a wealthy family, the Bennetts, who had mysteriously disappeared in the 1920s. Rumors and legends surrounded their disappearance, with locals whispering about strange happenings and cursed land. One article caught my eye, a report from 1923 detailing the sudden decline of the Bennett family. Mrs. Bennett had reportedly gone mad, claiming that the house was haunted and that dark spirits were tormenting her family. Her husband had been found dead under suspicious circumstances, and shortly after, the rest of the family vanished without a trace. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was a connection between the Bennett family's fate and Emily's haunting. I copied down the information and headed to the town's historical society, hoping they might have more detailed records. The historical society was housed in a small, quaint building filled with artifacts and documents from the town's past. I explained my situation to the curator, a middle-aged man named Mr. Thompson, who seemed intrigued by my quest. He led me to a back room filled with old books and ledgers. "We don't get many visitors interested in the darker aspects of our history," he said with a chuckle, "but if there's something to be found, it's probably in here." Hours passed as I sifted through the records, and finally, I stumbled upon a ledger detailing the Bennett family's financial transactions. Among the entries, I found numerous payments to a local medium, a woman named Margaret Blackwood. Intrigued, I made a note to find out more about her. Mr. Thompson noticed my interest and offered additional help. "Margaret Blackwood was quite famous in her time," he said. "She was known for her seances and supposed ability to communicate with the dead. If the Bennetts were dealing with a haunting, she's the person they would have turned to." Armed with this new information, I returned home, determined to dig deeper into Margaret Blackwood's involvement with the Bennett family. I spent the next few days researching her, discovering that she had lived in the same town until her death in the late 1930s. Her home was now a small museum dedicated to her life and work. I visited the museum, a small, unassuming building on the outskirts of town. The curator, a young woman named Lily, welcomed me and offered to give me a tour. As we walked through the exhibits, I noticed a collection of old photographs and letters. Margaret was a controversial figure, Lily explained. Some believed she had genuine abilities, while others thought she was a fraud. But one thing is certain: she had a significant impact on the people who sought her help. I asked Lily if there were any records of Margaret's seances with the Bennett family. She led me to a locked cabinet filled with old journals and letters. "These are Margaret's personal journals," she said. "They're filled with accounts of her seances and the people she helped." As I carefully read through the journals, I found several entries detailing her interactions with the Bennett family. Margaret had conducted multiple seances at their house, each one more intense and terrifying than the last. She described a dark presence that seemed to grow stronger with each session, feeding on the family's fear and despair. One entry stood out. "The darkness within the house is unlike anything I've ever encountered. It is ancient and powerful, feeding on the energy of the living. The Bennetts are in grave danger, and I fear I may not be able to save them. I must find a way to banish this evil before it consumes them entirely." I left the museum with a sense of urgency. The dark presence that had haunted the Bennett family had now latched onto Emily, and it was growing stronger. I had to find a way to banish it, to free Emily's spirit once and for all. As I drove home, the sun setting behind me, I couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. The darkness was closing in, and I had to act before it consumed me too. With the newfound knowledge of Margaret Blackwood's attempts to banish the dark presence, I knew I needed help from someone with experience in the supernatural. I reached out to a local paranormal investigator, Dr. Elizabeth Hayes, who had a reputation for dealing with hauntings and spirits. Dr. Hayes agreed to meet with me at my house. She arrived the next evening, a tall woman with an air of quiet confidence. Her equipment, a combination of modern technology and traditional tools, filled the living room. As she set up, I shared everything I had discovered about the Bennett family, Emily's childhood, and the dark presence that now haunted me. "We'll conduct a seance tonight," Dr. Hayes said, her voice steady. "If the spirit of Emily is trapped here, we need to communicate with her and find out what she wants. We might also draw out the darker presence, but we must be prepared for anything." As night fell, the house grew colder, the familiar chill settling in. Dr. Hayes set up candles and placed a large crystal in the center of the table. We sat across from each other, and she instructed me to focus on Emily, to think of her and call out to her. We joined hands, and Dr. Hayes began to chant softly, her voice resonating through the room. The candles flickered and the temperature dropped further. A sense of dread filled the air, and I could feel the presence of something watching us. "Emily," Dr. Hayes called out, "if you are here, please show yourself. We mean you no harm. We want to help you find peace." For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then the candle's flames flickered violently and the room seemed to grow darker. A soft, mournful voice filled the air, barely more than a whisper. "Help me." It was Emily. Her voice was filled with sorrow and fear. I felt a surge of emotion, tears springing to my eyes. "Emily, I'm here. I want to help you. Tell me what I need to do." The air grew colder and a mist began to form in the center of the room. Slowly, Emily's form appeared, shimmering and translucent. She looked at me with those familiar, sorrowful eyes. "John," she whispered, "I'm trapped. The darkness won't let me go." Dr. Hayes tightened her grip on my hands, her voice firm. "Emily, what is the darkness? How can we banish it?" Emily's form wavered, her expression pained. "It's an ancient evil tied to the house. It feeds on fear and despair. It's stronger now. Because of me." A sudden gust of wind blew through the room, extinguishing the candles. The darkness seemed to close in, and a deep, malevolent voice echoed through the house. "You cannot banish me," it hissed. "She belongs to me." The room shook, and a sense of overwhelming dread filled the air. I could feel the darkness pressing in, suffocating. Dr. Hayes began to chant louder, her voice a beacon of light in the oppressive gloom. "Be gone, dark spirit. You have no power here. We call upon the light to banish you." The malevolent voice roared in anger, and the room trembled violently. Emily's form flickered, her eyes pleading. "John, please, don't give up on me." I felt a surge of determination. I wouldn't let this darkness take her. I joined my voice with Dr. Hayes, calling upon whatever force could help us. "Leave this place. You have no power here. Release her." The room erupted in chaos, the darkness swirling and roaring, but slowly the chanting seemed to take effect. The malevolent presence weakened, its grip on the house loosening. Emily's form grew brighter, more solid. With one final defiant roar, the darkness dissipated, leaving behind a profound silence. The candles flickered back to life, casting a warm glow over the room. Emily's form remained, her expression one of relief and gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with emotion. "You've given me a chance to be free." I felt tears streaming down my face. "Emily, I'll do whatever it takes to free you completely, I promise." She smiled, a faint ethereal glow surrounding her. "I know you will. But the battle isn't over yet. Be careful, John. The darkness will try to return." With that, her form faded, leaving me and Dr. Hayes alone in the quiet room. The sense of dread had lifted, replaced by a fragile hope. I knew the fight was far from over, but I was more determined than ever to uncover the truth and free Emily's spirit from the clutches of the ancient evil. Dr. Hayes packed up her equipment, her expression thoughtful. "We made progress tonight, but we need to find the source of the darkness and destroy it. Only then can Emily truly be free." As she left, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The dark presence might have retreated for now, but I would do whatever it took to ensure it never returned. The battle for Emily's soul had just begun. The following morning, I woke with a renewed sense of determination. The darkness had been pushed back, but Emily's warning echoed in my mind. The battle wasn't over yet. I needed to find the source of the evil and destroy it once and for all. I decided to seek the help of a priest, hoping that a religious perspective might provide additional insights. Father O'Connor was the pastor of a small church on the outskirts of town, known for his deep knowledge of the occult and exorcisms. I called and explained my situation, and he agreed to meet with me immediately. The church was a serene place, a stark contrast to the turmoil I'd been experiencing. Father O'Connor greeted me warmly, his presence comforting and reassuring. We sat in his modest office, and I recounted everything that had happened: the haunting, the seance, and the dark presence. Father O'Connor listened intently, his expression serious. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, deep in thought. "It sounds like you're dealing with a very powerful entity," he said finally. "Something ancient and malevolent." "I don't know where to start," I admitted, feeling a sense of helplessness creeping in. "How do I destroy something like this?" The priest nodded thoughtfully. "We need to understand the nature of this entity. From what you've told me, it's been tied to that house for generations, feeding on fear and despair. It might be bound to an object or a place within the house. He stood and retrieved a book from a nearby shelf, its cover worn and faded. This is a collection of ancient rites and prayers used in exorcisms and banishments. I believe it will be useful in your fight against this darkness. As he handed me the book, I noticed a look of concern in his eyes. But be warned, John, this will not be easy. The entity will fight back, and it will try to use your fear against you. You must stay strong. I thanked Father O'Connor and left the church, the book clutched tightly in my hands. Back at home, I began to read, immersing myself in the ancient rites and prayers. The more I read, the more I realized how dangerous this endeavor would be. But I had no choice. I couldn't let the darkness consume Emily's spirit, or mine. That night, I prepared for the ritual. I gathered the items listed in the book: holy water, blessed candles, and a crucifix. As I set everything up in the living room, the familiar chill returned, and I knew the entity was aware of my intentions. I placed the book on the table and lit the candles, their soft glow casting long shadows on the walls. I began to recite the prayers, my voice steady and resolute. The air grew colder and the lights flickered, but I pressed on, determined not to let fear take hold. Halfway through the ritual, the malevolent presence made itself known. A deep, guttural growl echoed through the house, and the shadows seemed to twist and writhe. The temperature plummeted, and a sense of dread washed over me. "You think you can banish me?" The dark voice hissed, filling the room. "I am eternal. You are nothing." I gripped the crucifix tighter, my knuckles white. "Leave this place. You have no power here. In the name of God, I command you to leave." The growl turned into a roar, and the room shook violently. The shadows grew darker, almost tangible, and I could feel the entity's anger and desperation. But I didn't falter. I continued to recite the prayers, my voice rising above the chaos. The entity's resistance intensified, but slowly I felt a shift. The oppressive weight began to lift and the shadows receded. The growling turned into a pained wail, and then, with one final ear-splitting scream, the presence vanished. The room fell silent, the air warm and still. I collapsed into a chair, exhausted but relieved. The ritual had worked, at least for now, but I knew this was only a temporary victory. The entity had been weakened, but not destroyed. I needed to find its source and end it for good. As I sat there catching my breath, I heard a soft, familiar voice. "Thank you, John." Emily's spirit appeared before me, her form more solid and at peace than before. "You did it," she said, her eyes filled with gratitude. "But the darkness isn't gone. It's tied to something in the house. You have to find it and destroy it." I nodded, my resolve stronger than ever. "I will, Emily. I promise." She smiled, a sense of calm radiating from her. "Be careful. The darkness will fight back, but I believe in you." With that, she faded, leaving me alone in the quiet house. I knew what I had to do. The battle was far from over, but I was ready to face whatever came next. For Emily, for myself, and for the peace that had eluded us for so long. After the encounter with the dark entity in Emily's spirit, I felt a renewed sense of urgency. The battle wasn't over. It had only just begun. I needed to find the source of the darkness and destroy it once and for all. The next morning, I began a thorough search of the house. I combed through every room, every corner, looking for anything that might be connected to the ancient evil. The journal from Emily's mother had mentioned that the darkness was tied to the house, so I focused on areas that seemed older or more neglected. Hours passed, and I found nothing out of the ordinary. Frustration began to set in, but I pushed it aside, determined to keep searching. As I moved through the house, I noticed a small concealed door in the back of a closet in the master bedroom. It was hidden behind old clothes and boxes, as if someone had wanted to keep it out of sight. My heart raced as I cleared away the clutter and pulled the door open. Behind it, a narrow staircase descended into darkness. I grabbed a flashlight and carefully made my way down, the air growing colder with each step. The basement was dank and musty, filled with old furniture and forgotten relics. As I explored, the beam of my flashlight fell upon a large, ornate chest in the far corner. It was covered in dust and cobwebs, the lock rusted with age. I hesitated, a sense of dread washing over me, but I knew I had to open it. Taking a deep breath, I forced the lock open with a nearby crowbar. The lid creaked as I lifted it, revealing its contents. Inside, I found a collection of strange artifacts, ritualistic items, ancient tomes, and a large blackened mirror. The air around the chest felt heavy, oppressive. I knew I had found the source of the darkness. One of the tomes caught my eye, its cover adorned with strange symbols. I carefully picked it up and opened it, flipping through the pages filled with dark incantations and rituals. The book seemed to pulse with malevolent energy, and I could feel the darkness emanating from it. As I read, I realized that the book contained instructions for summoning and controlling dark spirits. The Bennett family must have found it and inadvertently unleashed the ancient evil that now plagued the house. I knew what I had to do. The book had to be destroyed, along with the other artifacts. I gathered them up and carried them upstairs, determined to rid the house of their dark influence. In the backyard, I built a fire pit and placed the artifacts inside. As the flames grew, I recited a prayer from Father O'Connor's book, calling upon the light to banish the darkness. The fire roared and the artifacts began to burn, their dark energy crackling and hissing. The blackened mirror shattered, and the book burst into flames, its pages turning to ash. The air around me grew warmer, and I felt a sense of relief as the oppressive weight lifted. The darkness was being purged. As the fire burned, I saw Emily's spirit appear beside me. She looked more at peace than I had ever seen her. "Thank you, John," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. "You've done it. The darkness is gone." Tears filled my eyes as I reached out to her. "I couldn't have done it without you, Emily. You gave me the strength to keep going." She smiled, her form shimmering in the firelight. "I can finally rest now. But remember, John, the light within you is stronger than any darkness. Never forget that." With those final words, she faded away, leaving me alone by the fire. The artifacts were reduced to ashes, and the sense of dread that had haunted me was gone. I stood there for a long time, watching the flames die down. The battle was over and Emily's spirit was free. The house felt different, lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted. I knew there would be no more hauntings, no more dark shadows lurking in the corners. Emily was at peace, and so was I. The darkness had been vanquished, and the light had triumphed. As I walked back into the house, I felt a sense of closure. The journey had been long and harrowing, but I had found the strength to face the darkness and overcome it. Emily's spirit would always be with me, a reminder of the love and light that could conquer even the deepest shadows. And for the first time in a long while, I felt truly at peace.